Whenever we hear the word tariffs, the first thing that usually pops into our heads is our wallets. And yeah, for good reason. But what if the higher prices we end up paying aren't just some unfortunate side effect? In this explainer, we're going to unpack the strategic logic behind recent US tariffs. And it's a logic that you'll see isn't really about you, the consumer, at all. I mean, it's the first thing we all learn, right? A tariff is just a tax on stuff that's imported. And like pretty much any tax, it almost always means someone's going to be paying a higher price.
And yeah, that someone is usually us, the consumers. When the price of TVs or cars or washing machines suddenly jumps up, we're the ones who feel it. It's basically Econ 101. But this is where the whole story takes a really interesting turn. Because what if that pain we feel at the checkout line isn't an accident? What if it's not a side effect at all? What if, and this is the key question, it's the entire point of the policy?
So this brings us to the absolute core idea. These tariffs, they were never meant to be a consumer-friendly policy. Nope, they were designed from the ground up as an industrial policy. The goal was to shift the entire economic focus of the country away from just buying things and back to actually making things.
And what's so fascinating about this slide is how clearly it lays out the fundamental conflict, right? As consumers, what do we want? We want lower prices and tons of choices, which cheap imports are great for. But domestic manufacturers, they want something totally different. They want protection from all that competition, and they want stable demand right here at home. These two goals are basically pulling in opposite directions.
So what exactly is this industrial policy we're talking about? Well, it's a strategy where the government doesn't just sit back and let the market do its thing. It actively steps in with a heavy hand to support and grow specific domestic industries. The whole point is to build a stronger manufacturing base. Now, this strategy is really built on a few core beliefs. First, the idea that the U.S. economy had become way too focused on just consuming stuff, which in turn hollowed out its industrial core. Second, the belief that tariffs can be used as a powerful tool to basically force companies to bring production back home. And third, and this is the part that's really tough to swallow for a lot of people, is that higher prices for you and me are an acceptable, maybe even necessary trade-off to get that industrial strength back.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures the philosophy. The whole argument is that a nation's real long-term power isn't just about its ability to buy things, it's about its ability to make things.
So let's talk about the strategic trade-off. How exactly are tariffs supposed to pull off this massive goal of reshoring entire industries? Well, it all comes down to a very deliberate, very strategic calculation. The mechanism is actually surprisingly straightforward when you break it down. Step 1, use tariffs to make imported goods really expensive. Step 2, suddenly domestically made goods look a whole lot more competitive on price, right? And step 3, this puts companies in a tough spot. It forces a choice. They can either keep paying the tariff and probably lose customers, or they can move production back to the US to avoid the tax altogether. So let's just be absolutely crystal clear here. The higher prices you might see on the shelf, that is not an accidental byproduct. That's not a mistake. Those higher prices are the tool. They are the entire point. They are what creates the pressure. This is probably the most blunt way you can possibly put it. The short-term pain that consumers feel is actually seen as a feature of the policy, not a bug. It's viewed as a necessary investment for the long-term gain of rebuilding factories, supply chains, and industrial jobs. It is a calculated sacrifice. And look, with any major policy choice like this, you're going to create some very clear winners and some very clear losers. There's just no way around it. This is a deliberate decision to put one group's interests ahead of another's. So who are the intended winners? Well, it's a pretty clear list. We're talking about U.S. manufacturers who now get some breathing room from cheaper foreign competition. The industrial workers they would hopefully hire. The whole network of domestic supply chains that support them. And, by extension, sectors that are considered critical to national security, which rely on having a strong industrial base at home. And on the flip side, the policy is just as clear about who bears the cost. First and foremost, it's consumers. The ones facing those higher prices. But it's also retailers who built their whole business model on cheap imports. And of course, anyone who believes that pure market efficiency, getting the lowest possible price no matter what, should always be the #1 priority. And you really can't understand any of this without this crucial piece of context. This was never just about abstract economic theories. This was a geopolitical strategy aimed squarely at countering China's massive and growing dominance in global manufacturing. So the big question is, was this just a temporary thing, a one-off? Or are we actually seeing a more permanent, lasting shift in how we think about the economy? Let's take a look at why this idea of industrial policy is suddenly back in the spotlight. This timeline really puts it all into perspective. The Trump-era tariffs, they were kind of the first big signal. But then the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, everyone saw just how dangerous it could be to rely on other countries for essential things like masks and medicine. And so now, today, these ideas of industrial policy and national self-reliance, they're way more mainstream. You hear them being discussed all across the political spectrum. So here's the bottom line for where we are today. The conversation has totally shifted. It's not really about if a government should do this anymore. It's much more about understanding the fundamental choice that this strategy forces all of us to make. And this right here, this is the choice it all boils down to. It's a choice between two different priorities. Do you prioritize the consumer of today and their desire for lower prices and more options right now? Or do you prioritize the manufacturer of tomorrow by focusing on building up long-term domestic production and industrial muscle? Honestly, there's no easy answer. It's a really fundamental question about what a country's economic identity should be and what it wants its future to look like. Should you protect consumers' wallets or protect domestic factories? This debate, it is far from over.